Bob Geller with PR Dun and Dunner, and I'd like to welcome Dan Prince to our show. He's a B2B comms pro who's led teams to success as an exec at top companies like Accenture, Alliant, Deloitte, Marsh, and Willis for 20 years. Dan traded in his corporate black socks for colorful happy socks when he launched Prince Comms about 2 years ago. And there he helps carriers, brokers, MGAs, other professional services companies, and insurtechs build brand awareness, create differentiation, and generate business growth via best practices that Dan has learned and honed throughout his career. And speaking of insurtech, I met Dan through the Insurtech New York meetup folks. We become friends and agency partners collaborating on client work. Dan is here today to discuss how his client-side work has made him better at PR. Welcome, Dan. How are you?
Thanks, Bob. Doing well. I appreciate the shout out on the socks. It gives me a chance to talk about one of my favorite people. It's my daughter. When I left the likes of Accenture, Alliant, Deloitte, and that litany that you offered, my daughter said, "Okay, Dad, enough with the black socks." And she bought me a drawer full of happy socks, Rolling Stones, and golf tees, and even pictures of our dog. And it's sort of a little thing I've adopted along the way. You got to wear black socks. You got to fit into the culture and do things a certain way in those big companies and their strong brands. But I like to ask, what if we try this? So I wear my socks, if you like, on my sleeve.
One day we'll see your socks and all this great gear when we get together, when our companies get together. I've heard a lot about it, and I know you have a blog with a similar concept. But at any rate, let's get into it.
Yes, thank you.
It's interesting here at Fusion, and in speaking with others I know in the agency side, I mean, we all want to do a good job. We want our clients to be happy. We want the program to be successful. But it's sometimes hard to get inside their heads. They don't always share feedback. And of course, we on the agency side have even less visibility into the organizations behind the client side PR managers. So it's really great to get your point of view. So maybe you could just share a little bit about your career. For example, what was your most senior communications role?
So I would put that at the director of communications for Deloitte Consulting. We had Deloitte's an interesting organization where we had a U.S. remit, but certainly projects around the world, and there's always something going on somewhere, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, with the various engagements and the complexity of those engagements. So it was a terrific role. I mean, Deloitte Consulting is a strong brand, and our job there, the remit I had, was actually to build Deloitte Consulting as opposed to the consulting practice of Deloitte. It might sound minor, might sound like a small distinction, but it's actually fairly important, because the whole notion was driving the brand and the awareness and the thought leadership of consulting as opposed to Deloitte overall. Because when people think Deloitte, rightfully so, they think about tax, they think about
Sure.
They think about the big four. And we were often grouped in that category, and we tried to carve out, I won't quite say extricate ourselves, obviously, because a huge part of the brand awareness is because of the Deloitte name, but there's a whole world of consulting capabilities beyond the tax and audit that a lot of people just aren't aware of.
Sure. But it'd be great to get a better sense of the range of your experience in working with agencies. Were they mostly, and not just Deloitte, but other of your roles, were they mostly large agencies? Were you pretty much stuck with the agency of record for the company? Were you able to ever pick your favorite agency?
A little bit of everything. There were always agencies of record, whether it was Deloitte, Accenture, Marsh are really the three best examples of where we absolutely had an agency of record, and they would look at if there was a financial services component to it, obviously publicly traded component to it, and the parent. But there were opportunities where we could engage with smaller agencies on a project basis, on a particular piece of content or on a particular unit, because at the large companies, our remit was so expansive the company was so expansive, but we couldn't possibly do everything for every unit. You take Marsh, for example, and all the insurance practices, all the various industry practices. We couldn't possibly cover all of them with the space that we had internally, with the people we had internally, and with the agency of record. So if it was for the sports and entertainment practice, or if it was for a biotech practice, we would engage an agency that had specific experience in those. And a lot of times, Bob, those agencies were hungrier, were more nimble, and obviously had a high degree of specialization in that particular field. So as the lead at, let's say, Marsh, for example, I want an agency of record that understands insurance across the patch, that understands construction and D&O and property and so on. But then you get into environmental risk, or you get into biotech risk, or you get into healthcare risk, and it requires a more specialized view of the world. And so the ability to pivot from agency of record or main agency, if you like, to some specialized places was quite important.
I can imagine that. Good. Were you ever able to pick an agency, suffer through the agency selection and pitching process, or?
Regrettably, regrettably, a few. There's a balance, right? There's an important balance there of, and I came from the agency side before I went corporate, and of course now back on my own. And there's an important skill set in, frankly, on the client side, of listening and knowing what is sales pitch and knowing what is idea, which people really have the industry expertise, who's there more for volume. Never really liked an agency coming in with 15 people, and you get the principal speaking and nobody else, because you know that you're really not going to get the principal on a day-to-day basis. You might at some shops, frankly, at the smaller shops, at the more nimble shops, but at the bigger firms, you're not going to get that principal on a day-to-day basis. And so who's there for volume? And I suffered through the procurement scoring sheets and the compliance checklists and
wow,
and all those pieces. Yeah, it can be painful. I will tell you, I much preferred the selection process where the dollar amount was within my purview,
right,
and below the threshold where we had to involve procurement, because there's a tendency there to go faster. And I think that's, I'll pivot there,
okay,
briefly. The large agencies, or at least my view of some of the large agencies, is there's a propensity to validate the hire, to validate the contract. Let us show you how smart we are. And unfortunately, what that often devolves into, Bob, is PowerPoint after PowerPoint and strategy conversation after strategy conversation. And I came
what
from,
about results?
Well, that's just it, right? I mean, I was in politics. That was my first job or jobs out of college, and then to the small agency shop, small agencies, shops, and it was all about results. It was all about go faster. It was all about get stuff done, and that's sort of my propensity. And so the large agencies, I felt, overdid or spent a lot of time on strategy, and it's important, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I never want to put tactics ahead of strategy, but eventually get stuff done, eventually get results. And I always found that I shouldn't say always, I generally found that the smaller shops had more of that execution mindset. Strategy is great and it's important, and let's get that in place. But then after that, go.
Get shit done. Get shit done.
Yeah, right. I wasn't going to go there, but get shit done. One of my bosses at very early on in my career, he ended every meeting. Ironically enough, he was actually on the corporate side. He ended every meeting with, "Let's go faster." And okay, let's go. But those places, the large institutions, regrettably have a way of slowing things down. Just institutional inertia against change and against driving fast. At least the organizations I was a part of. All great organizations, right? I got to put in the disclaimer, Bob. They're all great organizations, all terrific brands. They all provide great value. I don't mean to suggest otherwise, but the machinery that runs those places is just so massive, and wading through is a challenge. So getting stuff done is can be a challenge at big organizations.
So you were able to get good results both from the larger shops and the smaller shops as well?
Yeah, I think we did pretty well. You know, on a pound for pound, on a dollar for dollar, we definitely got better results, more meaningful results, I'll say, from the smaller shops. But that might be because the remit was quite narrow and was quite defined. So, you know, I won't name any names. I mean, they're good firms that I partnered with. I was happy to work with them, and terrific people. The smaller shops tended to focus a little bit more on the results and the outcomes. I think the other piece that I'll touch on here is sort of the so what factor. When you've got a specific project, there's a defined deliverable, and so one of our agencies one of the larger agencies that I worked with at one of the firms I was with said, we're going to increase these few leaders Twitter followers by 15%. And I asked, so what? You know, what does that mean? What does that 15% give us? Who are those 15%? Is it new business? Is it filler? Are they going to be influencers? You know, help me out with that metric. Whereas the smaller agencies with a defined deliverable, hey, we want to generate leads for this, or we want ink in these verticals for this particular initiative that we're launching, or this particular expertise that Deloitte has, let's say, for example, in California, because of the water crisis, right? That was a specific task that we had at Deloitte Consulting with our environmental practice. We did not use our main stage agency. We did not use our larger agency. We used an agency that had specific remit, specific capabilities in that space, and they did very well for us. So it's the execution piece and the results piece is often tied to the scope and the remit. The tighter it is, obviously, the better it is.
Made a comment about Twitter followers, and I guess that gets two results. And what does a 15% increase mean, really? And I guess a question I have, well, a couple. First of all, did you directly manage the agency, or did you have somebody under you managing the agency?
Depends on which remit, depends on which role. So Marsh, I had a broader role, so I was not the director of communications there. It was more an integrated MarCom function, and I actually had 140 people around the world, which frankly I never want again.
Wow, that's quite a team.
Yeah, it got to be.
That's an army. These are all comms execs, or
it is. Well, no, I mean it was integrated of marketing, communication, digital, creative, all of our writers as well.
Wow.
It turned into more managing 140 people than actually doing the work, which was a terrific role. I mean, the opportunity that I had in going back to Marsh was actually to build a marketing communications function in the likeness of Accenture. I absolutely loved my time at Accenture. An unbelievably great company, an unbelievably great culture, but I was offered the brass ring, right? Somebody put that down in front of me to say, hey, we want you to build a MarCom structure here at Marsh in the likeness of Accenture. So I couldn't possibly turn it down. So it was a broader role. At Deloitte, it was more hands-on with the agency and managing them and working with there were 3 business units at Deloitte Consulting, and obviously we had teams segmented with the agency with each of those in-house business units. And there it was a lot more direct. It was a lot more direct to the agency.
Well, whether it was direct or indirect, I mean, in your role, did you have to, I'd imagine you had KPIs, and I guess the question is, how did you measure success for an agency? What kind of pressure did you have on you from upper management, from the board? Did you need to report PR results back to the board? Do they understand PR? I mean, I know it's a lot of questions, but I mean,
yeah, no,
I'll get back to measurements. And
yeah, well, I'll sort of unpack that. The irony is that when I arrived at, I don't want to speak ill of Marsh. I don't mean this in that way, but when I arrived there, the company had just been coming out of, or just sort of recovering from, the Elliott Spitzer mess.
Oh, wow.
There wasn't a lot of sort of cohesive functionality. All the people were great, but those 140 people I mentioned weren't unified. So there
What was the
no,
connection to Spitzer? I didn't quite get that.
2006, I think it was, Elliott Spitzer basically sued Marsh McLennan Companies over conflict of interest based on the placement of insurance policies for clients based on a contingent commission scenario that was great for Marsh, but might not have been in the client's best interest.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So it was a big deal. It was a big deal in the insurance space, and Marsh took a huge reputational hit.
Oh, boy.
So I joined in that would have been in 2006, I think, and I joined in 2009. So there wasn't a lot of organization, right? When Dan Glazer, looked to retrofit, looked to get past, getting marketing communications in order was not his first job. Right, it was restoring the integrity of Marsh, and Dan's a terrific guy. I'd follow him off a cliff, but marketing communications was not his first remit, and so those folks were pretty much left on their own. All good people, but there was no coordination. So the media people in the U.S., the media people in media relations, that is, in London, the media relations people in the geographies around the world didn't talk to each other. Not because they didn't think about it, there was just no structure for it. The design standards were different around the world. The websites were different around the world. So we brought all that together. And one of the first things we did was, I asked the team was, send to me the last report that you provided to your boss that gave some element of metrics. And, ironically enough, Bob, my request was met with blank stares, or with silence on the other end of the phone, because they'd never done that before. They'd never been asked to do that before. And I don't blame them. Again, it goes to the structure of the organization. So we put that in place. And what I'm really quite happy with, and I'm proud, if you'll allow me, just for a moment, is after 6 months of being at Marsh, we developed a scorecard, a marketing communications report that was all about MarCom metrics. It was quite raw. It was quite a jigsaw puzzle, and we didn't have all the pieces there, but it was all an activity report. And we presented it to Dan Glazer, and I told him right from the outset, look, this is our first one of these. I am quite sure that the next one will look different, and the one after that will look different, until we get to a better place where we've got more business metrics. And Bob, we made great progress at Marsh. By the way, the 140 people all leaned in on this, so it was hardly me. We had great partners who oversaw our Salesforce implementation, and we tied all of our MarCom campaigns to Salesforce. So the last report that I handed to my boss, it wasn't Dan, but the last report that I handed to my boss had nothing to do with marketing communications activities, the number of press releases we put out, hits to the website, nothing. The last report was a Salesforce.com report, which had the value of the leads that we put into the system based on our marketing campaigns. So we really came a long way, and that was the goal, right? It's if MarCom isn't driving revenue, then what's the point? I mean, obviously it's a long path to it. There's the brand awareness, the differentiation, and so on. But ultimately, you've got to drive revenue. And I was really happy that last report was a Salesforce.com report of the value of the leads that our campaigns put in. At the other end of the spectrum, Deloitte was wired for metrics, and Accenture as well, for that matter. And so it was an absolute machine. And a lot of it was media based. A lot of it was impressions based. It wasn't necessarily, didn't have the growth orientation, just the nature of the company, right? You think about Marsh and insurance, it's more of it's a sales based effort. Whereas Deloitte and Accenture, in my mind anyway, are more service based.
Sure.
And so you don't have that.
Selling hours, you're not selling
exactly.
policies.
You're selling hours, not policies. And so you've got a different orientation. So we had, we had share of voice reports, which were terrific. And, I'm proud to say we blew all the metrics away. We came in number one, and
Great.
I made sure, having come from the agency side, I held our agency's feet to the fire to say, look, don't give me a report that says we're number one if we're really not there. I want to see the foundation behind it. Show me the results and give me an extrapolation of where are the other guys doing better than we are. So if construction, I'll go back to my Marsh days for a moment. If construction is really big for us, don't tell me that we're number one share of voice overall. Tell me how we're doing in construction, because that's where we want to drive business. That's where we want to drive revenue. And that's what I try to do at Deloitte as well, in terms of the human capital, the technology, and the other business units, was to make sure that we had segmentation, that we were not just number one overall, but how are we doing within each one of those units and each one of our practices.
Was it a lot of work to get the information you needed from the agencies? Did they have the tools to help you?
Yeah, it's TrendKite is I don't know what the forerunner is of TrendKite, but it's an incredibly valuable tool, and not necessarily giving them a shout out, Bob. Maybe we should get them to endorse the podcast or sponsor the
there you go. That's an idea.
Right.
Well, they're acquired by Cision. I think we're actually using them now because they're part of Cision, as I
but yeah, they are part of Cision, and TrendKite is a terrific tool. Great for share of voice, and our agency had their own approach to it. I don't know what tool they used, but I was always interested in that sort of the underlying reasons. Great, we're number one. Why? What did we do right? What are the other guys doing? Where can we do better? What's driving our coverage? Just to make sure that it wasn't just what's coming over the transom, that we're actually directing it. Because, by the way, that's the question. When you talk about the internal mechanics, that's the question that I'm going to get asked. You think about the people at Deloitte Consulting, they're pretty bright. They're great people. They're really smart. And they ask really hard questions, and rightfully so. So if I show up to a meeting and I say, hey, we're number one in share of voice, and I'm not prepared for all the follow-up questions, shame on me.
Well, they can say, so what? Just like you said, so what?
Yeah, so what? What did that get us? And so
what does that mean?
So it was always incumbent upon me to test the agency and to poke. In fact, I had one case, Bob, where the agency was presenting our numbers to me, and I was poking them and prodding them. And one of them asked, "Why are you?" And I had to be a naysayer because I knew the questions that I was going to get. And one of the people in the agency said, "Dan, I don't understand. Why are you assuming our numbers are bad?" And I said, I'm not assuming they're bad. I just need you to prove to me that they're good. Right? It's don't take my asking questions as trying to poke holes, or as questioning the value of the results, or the integrity of the results, or your claim that we're number one. Understand, and this goes to the point that we made earlier, or one of the points about how being client side has made me better on the agency side. I know what questions I'm going to get asked. So I'm going to poke the agency to give me the answers, because I know I'm going to get those same questions from my higher ups.
Great agencies, middling, terrible. What have you learned? What's the difference in, what separates them? What did you learn? What are some of the important lessons you learned on the client side that help you be better at what you do today?
I think I'll give you one by way of an anecdote, and that is listen. And I know it sounds silly, right? Everybody says the most important communication skill is to listen, but with one agency, we were going into we had our November meeting, and heading to December, I challenged them. I said, hey, listen, for the December meeting, I want to make sure that we're focused on a higher order. You guys are getting the press, it's good, it's translating, but it just feels like there's something missing. There's something else we could be doing. And by the way, I'm not quite sure what it is, but just have a think about that. And that's what I'd like our focus of our December meeting to be. And so the December meeting rolled around, and it was sort of business as usual. It was, here are our results, here's what we have in flight, and so on. And at the end of the meeting, I said, listen, maybe you guys didn't hear me last month, but let's plan this for January. I want to make sure that we're not just focusing on what we have in flight or the hardcore of the plan, which is critical, right? The strategy, but what else is there? What else can we be doing? What's that? I like to think of it as a higher order of thinking. January meeting comes up, and it was exactly the same of here's what we have in flight. I repeated myself, and about 2 weeks later, in early February, I got a call from somebody at the agency that they were offering me tickets to a concert. And I hung up the phone. Right, in the old days, that's when you had the receiver. I hung up the phone. I called my account lead and I said, listen, I think we have a problem. I'm not quite sure that your team is getting it, because I've asked for a different approach, and I was just offered tickets to a concert. There's a big disconnect there. I got a problem. Hung up the phone. 5-7 minutes later, the president of the agency calls me, apologizes, we get it. And a couple of days later, I had that higher order of thinking. And so I don't know if I'd say that that's specific, Bob, to the client side that made me a better practitioner, but it's listen. I will tell you one that's critical is understanding the machinations and understanding the pressure points that people on client side have. Selling in an idea on the client side can be challenging, because the agency, you figure, well, here's a great idea. Here are the 3 bullet points. Here's the reason why. Here's where it's going to get us. Here's why it meshes with your business strategy, and here are the results that we're going to generate, and here's how it's going to be meaningful for the business. Terrific, all good. I get that. Selling that in a large corporation can be challenging, because my higher ups in the corporate roles, they're business leaders, and so they're stretched across the patch. They're
Right.
looking at HR issues, they're looking at revenue issues, they're looking at client issues, they're looking at growth issues, they're looking at market conditions, they're looking at issues geographically globally. And so the agency convincing me that this is a good idea, or giving me the talking points, this is a good idea, is absolutely critical. But it's a different set of talking points that I need to then go and sell it internally. First and foremost, right? First and foremost, how much is it going to cost? What do we have to give up? Who's going to do it? Who's going to own it? So it's a challenge that agency side people aren't always aware of. After the status call, we offer ideas, and then the folks on the client side need to go implement, or need to sell it in, or need to figure out how we get the subject matter expertise in order to do that. And getting an SME to engage in a new effort requires more time for them to spend away from their clients. Obviously, in a professional services organization, getting an SME to spend time away from their clients can be a challenge. So that's an important piece of understanding. I guess it's the empathy thing, the empathy piece of understanding what life is like in my chair and what I need to do to be successful. Managing up, for example, is a huge piece of a lot of organizations. Giving people a line of sight, and again, the budget constraints are all big pieces.
So I think what you're saying is not that you don't like big ideas or creativity. You just want them to be, first of all, the agencies have empathy, and they should think through these things. They should be practical when they make these suggestions, and not just throw paint against the wall.
Right, exactly. A boss of mine once said, a big hairy idea that can't be implemented is just a big bad idea. I do love the audacious, and frankly, it meshes with the socks, right? What if we
There you
tried?
go.
That was sort of the point of big companies, big brands, and nothing against them, but they've got all the brand that they need. Right. Accenture, Marsh, Deloitte, they don't need to do things differently, and that's terrific. And they've built an enterprise that doesn't need to do those sorts of big audacious ideas. But that's also part of the reason why I enjoy being where I am, so that I can wear my happy socks and I can say to a client, hey, I got a crazy idea. What if we try this, right? Whatever it is. And obviously I'm all about reputation risk management. I'm never going to put my client's business at risk. But if you're number 12 or number 15 in an industry, and you're clawing for market share, and you're playing offense because you're trying to climb the hill, you got to do things differently. And that's really what I enjoy doing. But the big audacious idea that can't be implemented, it's just a waste of time. So practical is critical.
Well, maybe that's a good segue into what you're doing today. And I guess an obvious question is, why did you make the jump after all these years working for large corporations to your own gig? And what's that like? What's that like?
It's great. It's terrifying. It's rewarding. It's frustrating. Being an entrepreneur is akin to holding your breath every day for different reasons. Servicing clients, working with I'm fortunate, I've got a great bunch of freelancers, working with them. We're all in it together, fighting for the press. Are the reporters going to be responsive to? It seems as though there are more and more of us, Bob. There are more and more people fighting for that mind share, and fewer reporters for all the obvious reasons, the business model. But I'm loving it. I knew through the 20 years that I was in those corporate roles, I feel like the line from The Odd Couple, I knew that someday I would return. I knew that someday I would go back to the agency side, and I knew it would be my own. I just didn't know when. And the combination of roles that I had, I'm extremely fortunate. I'm happy to have been at all those places. And now that I've got my own gig, I can look back and I can say to a client, yeah, well, when I was the director of communications at Deloitte, and we got sued by the Marsh, the New York State Attorney General, or when we faced this implementation challenge in California, Florida, and Massachusetts at Deloitte Consulting, here's what we did. When I faced this fact pattern, here's what we did. And so I've got that body of experience, which is invaluable. I felt handcuffed at those places, not because of who they were, but because of what I wanted to accomplish and because of what I wanted to do. So there is no, what if we try this at the companies that I was with? There doesn't need to be. They don't have to do that. So I knew at some point over those 20 years that I'd go back agency side. I knew I'd start my own again. I just didn't know when. Because when I had my own 20 years ago, it was incredibly rewarding. It was terrific. I absolutely loved it. The circumstances were such that I was hired by one of my clients, by Willis. And at that point in my career, I had no agency side experience. I had no, I had no corporate experience, no publicly traded, no financial services, no global. And in going to Marsh, I had a chance to get all that in one.
Wow.
It was terrific. And in fact, Bob, I went to a recruiter. I was quite torn about this emotionally because I was giving up my own company. And I went to a recruiter and I said, hey, listen, help me out here. I'm torn by this. I don't want to do it, but it seems like good experience. And the recruiter said to me, I love you. I don't have time for this conversation. Go do it. It'll further your career. And he didn't quite say it this way, but the idea was in 20 years, you'll have this volume of experience. It'll make you a better practitioner on the agency side. And I don't mind telling you, that was Bill Heyman who said that to me. So there's another sponsor for the podcast, right? This segment brought to you by Heyman Associates. Bill said to me, I don't have time for this conversation, Dan. I love you. Go take the job. It's going to make you a better practitioner. You'll go back to the agency side at some point. You just won't know when. And so I always had that in the back of my mind.
So it's full circle. So it's kind of like coming home again. Were you, by the way, were you Prince Comms back then, or were you?
No, I was. It started as well, you're testing my knowledge, my memory here. It started as Daniel Prince and Associates. Reason why I did that is because it really was. It was all me, and I wanted to, not just I wanted to own it. I needed to own it. I needed to put my name on it to say I am the one who's responsible. As that enterprise grew, I think I got to 7 or 8 employees.
Wow.
And I pivoted the name. At some point, it was not just me, and I renamed it, DBA of the Prince Group, just to acknowledge that there's more here than just me. There was more offering than just the media relations piece of it, which is where we started. Say in 2001, I folded that. I went in house to Willis, and now Prince Communications rides again. So Daniel Prince and Associates Part 2.
This is a 20-year rebranding.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I'm loving it. I have the same.
That's great.
I have the same visceral. I remember when I had my own agency, I would get up at some ungodly hour of the morning. This is, obviously back in the late '90s, and it was all about the office and so on. I would get up at some ungodly hour of the morning. I'd ride the subway. I felt sorry for everybody else on that subway car because they were going to work for somebody else. And when I got to the office, I would take my key, and it was the glass door, so I had to get down on one knee to unlock it. And it was really, I was quite proud every morning when I unlocked that door at whatever 6:30 in the morning. And my wife and I built that agency from scratch. So this is 20 years in the making, and I'm absolutely loving it.
Welcome back to the agency world.
I wouldn't trade it. The cliche is true. You'll have more freedom. You'll have more flexibility. You'll have as much freedom and flexibility as you want to give yourself. And my dad actually gave me some great advice when I started the company the first time around, and he reminded me of it. He said there are two kinds of entrepreneurs. There are those who own the company, and there's those who are owned by the company. And there's absolutely I'm under no delusion that I own this company. This company owns me, but I love it. It's the client service. I get jazzed about seeing my clients succeed. I get jazzed about seeing my clients naming lights, right? Naming the press. I consider their competitors to be my mortal enemy.
You're in the fight with them. You're
right. And I think that's also a piece that I would share, Bob, is that when you're internal, obviously you don't have folks who are sometimes internal don't have the fear of losing a client because you're in-house, and so you're employed by the client. You can still get fired, don't get me wrong. But you don't have that agency sense of urgency. You don't have that agency visceral feel, and knowing the business model of the agency, which is if the client I'm working on leaves, and therefore the agency doesn't have revenue to pay me, I could be in jeopardy. And so having that visceral feel, that fire in your belly, I think is critical. So I always, when I work with clients, I always internalize it. And I do apologize from time to time when I say, listen, if we win this, or here's how I think we should approach this, because I do, I internalize my feel with my client, because you got to be in it with them. If you're not, and you consider yourself an outsider, and you consider yourself sort of just a service provider, you're not going to have that visceral feel.
Well, clearly you get this, but do you think enough folks on the client's side know what it's like on the agency side? Before you answer, I've known quite a few people who've gone from the agency to the client. It seems like they forgot everything they learned on the agency side. Now I'm the boss of an agency. I'm going to be a pain in the neck. And I don't know if you run into that at all.
Yeah, I have. And in fact, I think there's value in, there's value for each institution of having the skill set from the other institution, from the other side. I said when I was at Deloitte Consulting, I was, having come from the agency side and having been through, I actually said to my agency partner, it's critical to me that I'm a good client. it's critical to me that I'm a good partner. So if I ask you guys to do more, or if I put unreasonable expectations on you, you got to flag it to me. If you don't, and you come to me at at whatever point in time and say, hey, listen, our finances are out of whack, or the results aren't quite there, or if they come to me with a problem that's been festering for a long time that is at least in part my doing, then
Talk about maybe overages of too much time, or
exactly, overages. If you as an agency don't flag that to me as the client, over the course of time, then shame on you.
Good point.
Right? I need to be. I want to be a good client. I want to be fair about what we do. I don't want to hold. And look, when you're at the places I've been, there can be a feeling of, I don't care about the agency. I'm the client. Do what I tell you to do. And I don't buy that. I don't subscribe to that at all. I always wanted to be a good partner. And so I told the agency, if there's a problem, if I'm putting, if you've got overages because of what I'm asking you to do, or if there's some flag that comes up and you don't raise it to my attention, if I don't know about it, I can't do anything about it. So being a good agency partner is critical for client side folks.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'd say we're pretty much done. Would you agree we're done?
Never really done, Bob. If you've got, if you're fighting the battle of the inbox, which by the way, we're never going to win, but there's always another story. I always think about, I think this comes from my political days early on in my early training. What else can we be doing? Where can we tell another story? How can we drive a little bit more and have a deeper, higher level of thinking? But I think for the sake of our conversation, we've covered it. I appreciate it.
I love it. Well, my pleasure. Anybody who wants to contact Dan and check out Prince Comms, I will leave the information in the show notes. And why don't we close out with a Zoom 5? Great chatting with you, Dan. Look forward to seeing you again soon. And Zoom 5. Take care, Dan.
Thanks, Bob.